The dense, suffocating mist of an alien jungle hung heavy in the air as Commander Jake Carter crouched behind a thick, twisted tree trunk, sweat trickling down his neck. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears, but his hands were steady as he scanned the surrounding shadows through the scope of his rifle. The soft hum of the jungle's strange wildlife mingled with the distant drone of unfamiliar machinery, a haunting reminder of how far from Earth they truly were. "Eyes up! We're not alone," Carter whispered into his calm, his voice barely audible, even to himself. Sergeant Maya Reynolds responded from behind a massive fern, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "Roger that, Commander. Movements picking up on my 6, might not be friendly." Carter felt the tension coil in his chest. He signaled to his squad with a quick, deliberate hand gesture, directing them into position. The mission was supposed to be a simple recon, assess the enemy's fortifications, gather intel on the Galactic Empire's new outpost, and exfiltrate quietly. But nothing had gone according to plan since they landed. From the moment their boots hit the jungle floor, the oppressive heat and swirling fog had been the least of their worries. Now there was something more, something watching them. Private Lee, the youngest in the squad, nervously checked his equipment, his fingers twitching over his hollow display. "You think it's one of those creatures?" His voice trembled, despite his attempt at calm. Carter shot him a look, steady and commanding. "Doesn't matter what it is. We're not here for the wildlife. Stay sharp, keep your head clear." The central conflict began to unfold as the distant roar of machinery grew louder. The Empire's facility lay somewhere in the heart of this uncharted wilderness, hidden beneath layers of sophisticated cloaking technology. But the jungle held other dangers: native beasts, hostile creatures engineered by the Empire, and now the looming presence of something unseen but undeniably close. Reynolds shifted in her crouch, her eyes narrowing. "Whatever it is, it's fast. We need to move." Her voice was low, but there was an edge of urgency to it that Carter didn't ignore. A sudden screech pierced the air, cutting through the jungle's thick ambience like a blade. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls, closer than ever. Carter's instincts kicked in. "Go loud! Defensive positions, now!" The squad scattered, taking cover behind the thick trunks and boulders that dotted the uneven terrain. The sound of approaching danger grew, accompanied by the unmistakable click of metal, machines, but not the Empire's shock troopers. This was something else. The jungle erupted into chaos as an enormous, multi-limbed creature burst through the underbrush. Its eyes glowed an unnatural green, its skin covered in metallic plating that gleamed in the pale light of their gear. It was a nightmare made real, an abomination likely crafted in the Empire's labs, half beast, half machine. "Engage!" Carter barked as the thing charged, its roar deafening. Weapons fire lit up the misty gloom, bullets ricocheting off the creature's armored hide. Carter's pulse quickened as he watched the creature tear through their defensive line, knocking Reynolds to the ground with a savage swipe of its claw. Private Lee froze, his wide eyes glued to the monstrous form advancing on them. "Lee, snap out of it!" Carter shouted, diving between Lee and the beast, firing a barrage of rounds into the creature's exposed flank. The shots hit home, forcing it to stagger, but the fight was far from over. As the creature recovered, its glowing eyes fixed on Carter, the commander braced himself. They were only minutes into the mission, and already their survival was in jeopardy. The battle had only begun. The creature's glowing eyes narrowed, its hulking frame shifting as it sized up Carter. The humid air seemed to thicken, filling with the tension of a deadly standoff. Sergeant Reynolds, regaining her footing from the earlier attack, wiped the blood from her split lip and called out, "Commander! Its armor's weakest at the joints. Go for the legs." Her voice was strained but steady, the tone of a seasoned warrior refusing to give up. Carter nodded sharply, his mind racing through tactics. "Lee, Reynolds, flank it! We pin it down, then hit the weak spots." Private Lee, still rattled but now moving on instinct, fell into position beside Reynolds. His hands shook as he fumbled to reload his rifle. "I'm ready," he stammered, though his wide eyes betrayed his fear. Carter didn't have time to reassure him. There was no room for fear here, only action. The beast's metallic claws scraped the ground as it took a step forward, testing the humans who dared to challenge it. Carter's fingers tightened around his rifle's trigger. Now! The squad moved as one. Carter opened fire, his bullets aimed for the exposed joints in the creature's massive legs. Sparks flew as the rounds hit their mark, sending the beast into a stagger. It roared in fury, its bellows shaking the very ground beneath them. Reynolds darted to the right, sliding behind a tree for cover before unleashing a barrage of shots at the creature's flank. Come on, ugly! Over here! She taunted, drawing its attention. It turned with surprising speed, its eyes locking onto her. With a deafening roar, it charged. Reynolds sprinted, weaving through the thick underbrush as the creature tore through the jungle behind her, its metal-plated limbs smashing trees to splinters. Sweat poured down her face, the heat of the jungle mingling with the heat of the chase. Carter saw his chance. He dove to the side, rolling into a crouch, his rifle aimed at the beast's hind legs. Lee! Fire! Private Lee hesitated for a heartbeat too long, panic flashing in his eyes, but then he squeezed the trigger. His shots rang out, one striking the creature's knee joint with a crackle of energy. The beast faltered, collapsing onto one leg with a howl of pain. Carter didn't waste a second. He charged forward, rifle blazing, aiming for the now exposed underbelly. His shots tore into the softer flesh beneath the armor, each bullet hitting with precision and force. The creature lashed out in desperation, swinging its claws in wild arcs. Carter narrowly dodged the blow, feeling the rush of air as the claws missed his head by inches. Keep firing! Carter shouted over the deafening chaos, his voice hoarse with exertion. Reynolds and Lee unleashed a final barrage, bullets piercing through the creature's weak points, until it collapsed with a final, guttural snarl. For a moment, the jungle was eerily silent. Carter, breathing heavily, approached the fallen beast, his weapon still trained on it, just in case. The creature lay motionless, its glowing eyes dimmed to nothing. Status check, Carter ordered, turning to his team. Reynolds was on her knees, clutching her side where a sharp branch had grazed her during the chase. I'll live, she muttered, wiping dirt from her brow. Lee stood frozen, staring at the fallen monster, his chest heaving. Is it dead? Carter nodded grimly. For now. But that was just a scout. We've got bigger problems ahead. A low rumble echoed through the jungle, the sound of more machinery, getting closer. The squad exchanged a tense glance. Their fight wasn't over. Get ready, Carter said, his voice steely. The Empire knows we're here. The ground trembled beneath their boots as the rumbling machinery grew louder. Carter crouched behind the thick foliage, eyes scanning the horizon. The air smelled of burnt metal and damp earth, a strange mix of the jungle's natural humidity and the acrid stench of approaching enemy tech. They're getting close, Reynolds muttered, her breath shallow but determined. She had torn a piece of cloth from her sleeve, tightly binding the gash on her side. Sweat dripped down her temple, but her eyes were sharp, unflinching. Lee crouched beside her, still jittery from the earlier fight. How many do you think there are? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carter's jaw clenched. Too many for a frontal assault. We're outgunned and outnumbered. But if we play this smart, we can make it through. The thick canopy above them shuddered as the first of the Imperial walkers came into view, massive machines with gleaming silver hulls, moving through the jungle like predators on the hunt. The mechanical whine of their engines echoed in the humid air. We need to lead them away from the crash site, Carter said, his voice low but commanding. If they find the ship, it's game over. They'll swarm us, and HQ won't be able to send help in time. Reynolds wiped the blood from her lip and nodded. What's the plan? Carter scanned the terrain, noting the dense undergrowth and the steep incline to their left. An idea took shape. We draw them into the ravine, narrow space, hard for their heavy artillery to maneuver. We set up an ambush, hit them fast, then disappear before they can call for reinforcements. Lee swallowed hard. What if it doesn't work? Carter turned, his expression steely. Then we improvise. But we don't stop fighting. The tension in the air was thick, pressing down on them like the weight of the enemy approaching. Carter motioned for them to move, and they silently slipped through the dense jungle, their boots crunching over leaves and twigs. The humid air clung to their skin, making every breath feel labored. As they reached the ravine, Carter surveyed the area. The steep walls provided natural cover, and the narrow path would bottleneck the walkers, giving them a fighting chance. He pointed to a nearby ridge. "Reynolds, take position up there. You'll have the best vantage point. Lee, you're with me. We'll plant the charges here and here," Carter said, marking spots with quick precision. The low rumble of the walkers grew louder, their massive feet crushing everything in their path. Time was running out. Reynolds climbed to her perch, her rifle already trained on the path below. Lee's hands trembled as he set the charges, the faint beeps of activation sounding far too loud in the stillness. Carter worked alongside him, his mind focused, calculating every variable. "Get ready," Carter whispered, as the first walker entered the ravine. Its metallic frame shimmered in the dim light, a towering beast of war. Reynolds' voice crackled through the calms. "Target in sight. Just say the word." Carter waited, the tension coiling tighter with every second. Then, as the second walker entered the ravine, he gave the order. "Now." Reynolds fired, her shot striking true and hitting the lead walker's joint, sending it crashing into the narrow ravine walls. Carter hit the detonator, and explosions rocked the earth. Fire and debris filled the air as the charges ripped through the metal hulls. "Move! Now!" Carter barked, already pulling Lee to his feet as the chaos unfolded around them. But through the smoke and fire, Carter saw it, another wave of walkers on the horizon, larger, more heavily armed. The battle was far from over. The smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning metal. Carter squinted through the haze, heart pounding. The second wave of walkers, larger and bristling with weapons, advanced relentlessly. Their mechanical growls reverberated through the ravine like a death march. "We don't have enough charges for this," Lee said, panic lacing his words. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his brow as he adjusted his rifle. Carter knew he was right. The first ambush had worked, but it was only a momentary victory. These new walkers weren't just bigger, they were smarter, their movements more calculated, as if learning from the previous assault. The Imperial forces had always underestimated humanity, but now they were adapting. "Focus," Carter barked. "We don't need to take them all out, just enough to slow them down. Reinforcements are on their way." He glanced at Reynolds perched on the ridge, her rifle still trained on the advancing machines. "How long until they get here?" Lee asked, his voice rising with each word. "Not long enough," Carter muttered under his breath. He knew that in truth, they were alone, at least for now. And if they didn't figure out a way to stall the enemy, they wouldn't survive long enough to see those reinforcements. A metallic roar echoed across the ravine as one of the lead walkers unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, the bright beams slicing through the jungle. Trees exploded into shards of splintered wood, sending debris raining down on them. Carter shoved Lee behind a boulder just in time to avoid a blast. "We can't stay here," Reynolds called over the comms. "They're pinning us down." Carter's mind raced, searching for a way out. The ravine, though a natural trap for the walkers, was also a death sentence for his team if they didn't move fast. The charges had done their job, but the enemy was still coming, relentless, unstoppable. Suddenly an idea sparked. Carter's gaze fell on the ridge above them. The jagged cliffs. Loose rock. "Reynolds, I need you to hit that ledge. See if you can bring the whole thing down on them," he said, urgency filling his voice. Reynolds hesitated for a split second. "You're asking me to cause a landslide? We're right below it." "Trust me," Carter replied. "If we don't, they'll cut us down before we can even blink. This is our only chance." There was a beat of silence before Reynolds responded, her voice hard with resolve. "Copy that." Carter grabbed Lee by the arm and yanked him to his feet. "Move now! Get to cover!" They sprinted, dodging debris and enemy fire as Reynolds took her shot. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing through the ravine, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the cliff groaned, shifting ominously. A rumble, low and terrifying, began to build as the rock face trembled. Come on, Carter urged, pushing Lee behind a large outcrop just as the cliff above gave way. The landslide was deafening. Tons of rock and debris crashed down, sweeping over the advancing walkers. Metal groaned under the pressure, and the lead machines were buried in an avalanche of stone and earth. Carter dared to look back. The dust was still settling, but it was clear. The front line of the enemy was decimated, tangled wreckage and shattered metal scattered across the ravine. Nice shot, Reynolds, Carter said, a rare grin crossing his face. But it was short-lived. Through the cloud of dust, more shapes emerged. The enemy wasn't done yet. The next wave was coming.